we do if we're in an organization that does not encourage mentoring? Worse yet, what if we have having spears thrown at us by the very leaders who should be mentoring us? There was a young man exactly in that situation many years ago during a period when the Israelites wanted a king like all those other nations. Well, they got their king, but discovered that kings like him don't have their best interests at heart all the time and don't always leave a legacy. They actually make terrible mentors. But how can we make sure that we don't become like King Saul?
Welcome to Leadership Matters with Dr. Phil. His podcast discusses matters of leadership that really matter. Phil has had the privilege of mentoring leaders and coaching ministry teams around the world for several decades, and he's really looking forward to sharing with you some of the principles that have been so helpful for others. Leadership is about serving others, not power or position. Regardless of our context, family, job, ministry, or any circle of influence, we all have the potential to be this kind of leader. A foundational leadership skill that is often overlooked is mentoring intelligence. This series is based on the materials Phil has developed over a lifetime and taught in a variety of cultural contexts. To access all of our podcasts as well as our bonus leadership resources, just click the links in the description below or go to icmcanada.org/leadershipmatters or icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. So now, let's join Phil as he discusses some leadership matters.
Often emerging generations find themselves looking for someone to mentor them, but discover that the previous generation is either too busy or feels too threatened to do that. And what is the answer for an emerging generation that wants to be mentored, but cannot find someone who will be willing to mentor them? The lack of those from previous generations willing or able to be mentors is why peer mentoring can be a viable and actually often only alternative. Peer mentoring is often the only option, particularly when there is a lack of leaders willing to be mentored. Let's revisit the story from 1 Samuel of King Saul and the young David. As we saw in episode 4, the people wanted a king like the other nations. So even against God's objectives, they got what they wanted, or maybe what they thought they wanted. But we see that as Saul aged, instead of mentoring the next generation, he tried to pin them to the palace wall with a spear. And yes, if you're wondering, this is usually fatal. As I've taught on the subject in many different cultures, I've consistently had young leaders share a similar story as they would talk to me after the session. I can usually now pick them out of the crowd. They all have that same fearful yet hopeful look in their eye, a hesitancy that one gets by looking over one's shoulder, wondering where the next spear is coming from. These are classic indicators of young leaders who are dodging spears thrown at them by leaders who they thought they could trust. They had signed up for leadership, but were now in a palace that was controlled by a leader who had no interest in helping them fulfill their calling. Young David was in such a situation. Remember, he had just killed, the main enemy of the country, a giant of a man. And this did not go unnoticed by the songwriters of the day. They had written a catchy little number that had 2 verses. Now, the first verse of the song really appealed to the narcissism in King Saul. It went something like this, Saul has killed his thousands, had kind of a nice ring to it, if somebody could sing, unlike me. What's not to like about that? But then, and wait for it, there was a second verse. Same tune, different words. And David has killed his tens of thousands. Yeah, as you can imagine, that didn't go over so well with the king. Power-driven leaders don't like sharing the limelight. My guess is that the songwriters never really ran that by Saul first. I'm not really sure what happened to them. But we do know that Saul got predictably angry, which may explain all the yelling and spear throwing. Imagine, he was a king for 40 years, and yet he was threatened by this young upstart who really was a nobody. Pretty sad. But it's unfortunate, isn't it, that this still happens today, and yes, even in the church. Now, a couple things I've learned that I tell young leaders from this story. First thing, never throw the spears back. Having killed a bear and a lion and a giant, do you think David could have skewered the aged King Saul to the wall? Probably. Not too much of a problem, I would think. But if he would have done this, the story we know would be quite different. Instead of becoming a leader after God's own heart, he would have become like King Saul. We reproduce as we saw who we are. And there are some people who you don't want to allow them to mentor others or to mentor you. Because they'll have an impact on you, and what they value will rub off on you. Opening our hearts to a King Saul in our lives will mean being mentored in how not to be a leader. But this is a tough test for an ambitious young leader who's starting out and wants to move forward. Now, David never became a leader after the pattern of King Saul. Now, how do we know that? Well, years later, when David is an older man, his own son tries to take the kingdom from him. As a young leader, David resisted taking the throne by force, and even in his old age, he was not willing to keep the throne by force. Unlike Saul, he fled the city and would not raise his hand against his son Absalom. As a young leader, I kind of thought this was rather a weak look for David. Come on, David, stand up for what is right. But David knew something, and he knew that the kingdom was not his to own or to fight for. He merely was a steward. He was just a steward of it. At his heart, he was a worshiper. And he knew he could go back to that. He could go back to the field and be a worshiper. His identity did not rest in his position as a king or in his position in the palace. It had nothing to do with that. Can you imagine if we all held our positions and our ministries that loosely? Young David was willing to wait for God's timing. He was called, but God was still not really finished preparing him for what he wanted to do in his life. This is the second thing I tell young leaders. You may be gifted and called, but do you have enough character to sustain your gifting at this point? It's important to wait for God's timing. But what did David do while he was waiting for God's plan to unfold? Did he just sit and do nothing? There's a great little book, if you can get your hands on it, by Gene Edwards. It's called The Tale of Three Kings. And it might be one of the most thought-provoking books you'll read on leadership. It's a great little book, a quick read. But back to 1 Samuel 22. We find a David running for his life from his potential mentor, the king. Not really a pretty picture, is it? But it was in the desert and in the caves that God taught him some very valuable lessons. It says in verse 2 of chapter 22 that all those that were in distress or in debt or discontented gather around him. Great team, eh? Try that out next Sunday. Hey, we're going to start a new small group of leadership training. But we only want those that are distressed and in debt, discontented. Depressed is even better. You come join us. I'm sure many will likely sign up. And that is exactly what David had to work with. I would suggest that as they were living and eating and running together, David was mentoring them. They saw what he did when he could have killed Saul on several occasions, but he didn't. I'm sure they even heard him pour out his heart as he sang his psalms with his harp on those late nights in the desert. So years later, when David later stepped into his role now as a king of the nations, where do you think he populated his top government positions from? Well, I know it wasn't not from the existing experienced politicians who had been around Saul for all these years, because their heads had already been detached from their bodies. No, it was from these same men who had been with David in the trenches. In those years of running, he had developed his own team, way before there was any palace perks to offer them. It was these men who were in distress and in debt that became known as David's mighty men of valor. Unlike Saul, David's band of brothers had been mentored with a different set of values. Peer mentoring like this can be a powerful tool as we develop others to form a team so that we can together fulfill God's purposes. Okay, so to begin with, I tell these shaken, often insecure young leaders to not throw the spears back. Otherwise, you become like Saul. Secondly, to wait for God's timing And third, while they're doing that, develop others, even if they seem unlikely leaders at the time. One day, who knows, they may be the very ones who are part of our core support network. Now, this is the power of peer mentoring. This biblical account is a ray of hope for us if we find ourselves either alone or having to run from a leader who is a narcissistic or an egomaniac, intent on keeping us in our place. To do this, we have to find those who will share our values, and these will likely be peers who we can develop and run the race with. Now, there are times that we have to get out of Saul's palace. There may be, and that's not an easy decision, particularly when you're a younger leader. But it is not necessarily godly to stay in an unhealthy situation. On one hand, we don't want to run from what God wants to use to make us into the leader He wants us to be. He might be building our character. But on the other hand, we have to have wisdom to know there are times to reevaluate our situation and make a change in order to run the race with those who share our values.
Listeners of our Leadership Matters podcast have exclusive access to our free bonus leadership materials, which include our MQ assessments as well as his Developing Others workshop. Just click the link in the description or go to our website, icmcanada.org/mentoring-intelligence. If you would like to take a deeper dive into this topic, click on the link in the description box where you can download Phil's Mentoring Intelligence book and the workbook. In it, he discusses the key factors that affect our mentoring intelligence and then offers a practical mentoring model which leaders have been using for decades around the world. The Mentoring Through Intentional Relationship Guides are a practical model to actually help you mentor someone. They are available in several languages and over the years have been used by thousands of leaders. The content, discussion questions, and other tools are designed to assist you in mentoring a potential leader and are available at icmcanada.org/resources.
In our next episode, I will spend a bit more time exploring the peer mentoring relationship. But before we do that, I need to spend a few moments to explain the 4 phases that all mentoring relationships go through. To try to maintain this type of mentoring relationship at an intense level forever, it really becomes counterproductive eventually. For it can lead to one person controlling another, and this will cause frustration then in the other person. Relationships like this become unhealthy. To receive the full benefit of a mentoring relationship, we have to plan for a healthy separation. And that's what we want to talk about. Mentoring relationships provide various functions for both the mentor and the mentoree. But healthy mentoring relationships need to transition into one of 3 types of peer relationships. But for this to occur, we need to understand the 4 stages through which all mentoring relationships must progress. These are initiation, cultivation, thirdly separation, and finally redefinition. Now, the initiation phase is the first predictable phase of the mentoring relationship. This may last from a few weeks to several months and is the time when the relationship becomes important to both individuals. During this phase, motivation is high and the expectations of what each party provides for the other is the strongest. Now, the cultivation phase is the second and really lasts the longest. It is a time in which the mentoree benefits the most from the mentoring relationship, and the relationship is generally seen as positive with the fewest conflicts and uncertainty. This is when the growth really occurs during this period, and it can last from a year to several years. As the bond develops, the mentor is able to provide guidance in both ministry and personal functions, as we've mentioned. Now, the third phase, the separation phase, is often overlooked, but it's a necessary phase of the relationship. As the mentoree grows and gains more confidence, there inevitably emerges a change in the dynamics of the relationship. It is a period of change which signals the ending of the relationship as it currently is. This transition can be damaging to both parties, particularly if it is not anticipated and prepared for. So during the separation phase, the mentoree typically assumes greater independence and autonomy, which normally will lead to a reassessment of the relationship. But if we don't prepare for this, it can lead to misunderstanding and harm the development of the emerging leader. Now, opinions vary regarding this, but it's my view that these intense mentoring relationships we've been talking about should have a limited duration and transition to a slightly different type of relationship in order for them to stay healthy. If we try to maintain them at this intensive level forever, like I said, they can become destructive, for they begin to no longer meet the needs of the individuals. Within a Christian context, it is the failure to understand this dynamic of separation that can perpetuate this unhealthy approach of a father, as the model of mentoring, the spiritual fathering we talked about, where this relationship stays kind of frozen in that state forever. Now, the separation phase then leads, now to a fourth phase, which is the redefinition. Now, most mentoring relationships develop into peer relationships during this phase. It is at this point that the relationship can take on even more meaning and purpose. For an intensive mentoring relationship, often a friendship is formed. This leads to several options of peer mentoring that we'll look at. Healthy, intensive mentoring relationships will naturally go through the above four phases. To the degree that we do not fully appreciate this is the degree to which we will not be prepared to make the necessary transitions as the mentoring relationship begins to change. While the duration of each of these phases will vary, the general progression through each of them is rather predictable and important to consider. As a mentoree grows and becomes more autonomous, he no longer looks to the mentor for the kind of guidance and suggests that he or she is used to. Intensive mentoring relationships seem to have a lifespan, and so the question becomes, what happens after such a relationship? My experience has been that one person can usually not sustain this level of relationship with another over a lifetime. This is why we have multiple varied mentors at any given point in our lives. So to keep the relationship healthy during this reevaluation phase, the choice should be made to embark on one of more of a peer relationship. These peer relationships offer some of the same functions as other mentoring relationships, and in most cases are even more available. Peer mentorship can be a viable alternative if upward mentors are not available. As with other mentoring, though, there are many types and levels of peer mentoring, yet they are available at every life stage. They can last decades rather than the intensive mentoring relationship, which tends to last for only a maximum of several years. As we saw earlier, these mentoring functions can be divided into personhood functions and ministry or career functions. This is also the case with peer mentoring. Personhood functions include emotional affirmation for each other as we share our perspectives, values, and our beliefs through the various stages of our lives. They also provide support as we listen and counsel each other through transitions and stress. Some even progress beyond work-related issues and become a personal friendship. So the ministry or career functions of a peer mentoring relationships include sharing information with each other regarding how to navigate ministry or the organizations that we're part of and so on. In this context, we can discuss and learn from each other's spheres of responsibilities and ministries. It provides the opportunity for feedback concerning ministry-related matters that help to clarify our own strengths and weaknesses. In this episode, I've suggested that peer mentoring is a viable option if someone cannot find an upward mentor. This can provide us hope if we're in an organization that is not conducive to mentoring relationships. And having introduced now the four phases of a mentoring relationship, in the next episode, I want to provide a few more thoughts regarding peer mentoring. And I sure hope you're going to join me. But before then, I'd like to share with you just a few leadership matters to consider. Have you been dodging spears? What have you learned from David's example? Do you have peer mentors? How would you describe what you receive or give in these types of relationships? In considering the phases of a mentoring relationship, do you struggle with the need to separate and define the relationship?
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters. If this has been helpful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share us. Doing this will enable others to benefit from this material as well. If you would like to partner with us to provide these materials to leaders who cannot afford them, please go to icmcanada.org/donation.